I now refer to your book, Churchill and India, which is a fascinating subject. Now, do you believe that the world leaders in the aftermath of the Second World War uh, took the newly formed India for granted, or do you think Mr. Nehru failed to secure the interest of the country, for example, by giving up the Security Council seat?
Look, the national independence movement of India, led by Gandhiji and Jawaharlal Nehru, Sardar Patel, Maulana Azad, and all the others, they engaged with the British. They engaged with the colonial power as best as they could, right up to and including the visit of the Cripps mission and the failure of the Cripps mission. The, and then they were jailed. Yes, the Azad Hind movement was it well timed? That can be debated. But in effect, for a period of almost 3 years, the leaders of the Indian national movement were removed from the stage. They were held in confinement, solitary in the sense that they could not even engage with each other, communicate with each other. So the onus for that lies really with the British authorities and with Winston Churchill personally. This is something that has not been investigated sufficiently. It has not been examined through documents because I don't think our historians, we've been so fascinated by the drama in Delhi that we kind of forgot to look at the larger picture. And Churchill had no interest. I mean, Churchill, he played his cards very cleverly with the Cripps mission, going through the motions while, in effect, sabotaging the Cripps mission. And then he lost interest. So I call these 2.5, 3 years as the wasted years.
So, when you think of India today in the eyes of the world, what are the two or three words that jump to your mind?
Ah, autonomous in its decision making, reaching out to the world, and leveraging economic growth to attain a degree of global recognition.
Thank you. Thank you. When you think of Mr. Modi as a person and as a prime minister, what are the two or three words that jump to your mind?
Well, um, he has used economic growth as a foundation for moving forward. He has provided basic amenities to the people of India, which was sadly neglected literally for decades, whether it was safe drinking water, um, housing, sanitation, education benefits, basic health benefits. So, these are the things that lay a foundation for domestic support. Internationally, um, I would particularly emphasize his outreach to neighbors. You know, it is amazing that before 2014, Indian leaders had not paid bilateral visits to the immediate neighbors like Nepal, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, literally for a matter of 20 and 30 years. And he rectified this. And we all talk about neighborhood, but every country has to first focus on its own neighborhood. And we sadly neglected this. And it is astonishing that in 10 years of power, Manmohan Singh, otherwise thought to be a very fine leader, capable in many ways, did so little on this. That's international affairs. Domestic affairs is another story, but I think that is not our main focus today.
Correct. Correct, correct. I think you partially answered my next question, which was to look at the past before we look at the present and the future, which was to compare the 10 years of the Modi government to 10 years of the UPA under the Prime Minister of Mr. Manmohan Singh. What would be your broad evaluation, sir, of the UPA government?
I would say that India has used its uh, capabilities, its attraction as a major market, its fairly solid economic performance as a magnet for foreign partners to turn their attention to India. Because ultimately, um, a country marches abroad on its stomach. You have to have the domestic capabilities to attract people to your country. But that's not enough in itself. You must also manage your policy in an astute manner, in a way that doesn't stand on outdated concepts and focuses on what is attainable. And I think this is exactly what the Modi government has tried to do, a balanced approach, um, working with global south countries. Um, we are not going to compete with China when it comes to doling out large amounts of loans or cash or investments. But in our own way, we've done the best we can. We have built relationships across Africa, for example. Something like 15, 18 new embassies have been opened in the last 5 years. Again, that is essential diplomatic outreach.
Okay. If we come to the United States, the only so-called superpower in the world, how do you think the Modi government has managed India's relationship with the United States, particularly in the last 10 years, building on the relationship that Mr. Manmohan Singh had already established with the nuclear deal, etc.?
It has managed the relationship with a great deal of dexterity, with caution, and with balance, I would say. Um, we have to be open to a range of partners because while the United States is the single most powerful country in the world, we do live in a world that is increasingly multipolar, and we have to then balance our approach to the US with the approaches to the other countries, be it Russia, be it China, engage China, have dialogue with China, even if it doesn't appear to be fruitful, but persist because jaw is better than war, as somebody said. And at the same time, reach out to Europe, particularly to Japan, to Korea, to the other Asian countries, not just ASEAN, but the others, Australia, for example, the Gulf region. I mean, this is practical, um, pragmatic diplomacy.
Mhm. Now, there is an interesting dynamics in the U.S. Happening at the moment with Mr. Donald Trump, having a real possibility of, becoming the president again. Now, how do you think Mr. Modi will be able to manage the mercurial Mr. Trump if he comes back to power?
Look, when um, when a prospective candidate, a leading candidate like Trump, campaigns and he is not in power at the moment, the things he says have to be taken as part of an electoral campaign. That happens in every part of the world. I think we will find a way of dealing with President Trump if he comes to power, in the same way that we dealt with him in the past. Uh, if you remember very well, that Prime Minister Modi, in fact, built a fairly good equation with President Trump. But that's in the future. Let's just see how it all plays out. But I wouldn't get too excited about the problems that we might have with Trump, etc., because again, a candidate and a person who takes office as president are two different people in some ways. The latter operates within certain constraints and certain um, real uh, limitations and practical requirements from uh, the US point of view in this particular case. So let's deal with it as it happens. I mean, without getting too excited about it.
Okay. Now, the NATO alliance has has been in bit of a shock with Mr. Trump's statement, and even when he was in power last time, he did threaten them that unless they paid up,
Yeah.
US wouldn't come to their help. So, in the light of that, would you see Mr. Trump in his second presidency supporting the Quad alliance that we have built with the with Australia, UK, and so on, and our fight with China?
I'm not sure if, uh, as president, Mr. Trump would take a different approach fundamentally. There may be some changes in nuance, I'm sure. But again, this lies in the future. I see not much value in speculating about things to which we really have no reasoned answer or any clear cut, what shall I say, assessment that we can make of it. Uh, it's all a question of dealing with the situation as it evolves. Situations evolve all the time. And I would say that monofocus on the United States is perhaps not the way out for India. We have to deal with a whole number of other players, powers, entities, Russia, Japan, other countries in Asia, neighbors. Um, you Let's take Pakistan as an example. We have to engage Pakistan. We have to communicate with Pakistan. Right now, we don't have ambassadors in each other's countries, which seems to be a bit of a pity because, in any case, we have senior diplomats who head the missions. So, why not send ambassadors or high commissioners? Right now, it would be high commissioners because Pakistan has been in and out of the Commonwealth at different times. But these are details. We mustn't take the position vis-a-vis any country that we will not engage. We will not deal with them. We deal with everyone. We keep our balance. We focus on our own interests, but we are also willing to listen. And that's the policy of multilateral engagement or multipolar engagement in this case. Russia is an important player. We can't afford to ignore Russia. So are several major European powers. Each of them has their own uh, characteristics, their own utility from our perspective, and we deal with all of them.
Now, some analysts have suggested that the West is owing India only as a security and economic counterbalance to China. So, do you believe India is being used as a pawn in the strategic rivalry between superpowers?
Well, you know, um, whether you are used as a pawn or not really depends on your own actions. I mean, India is too much of a country rooted in its own self interest, rooted in its uh, enlightened self interest, keeping in mind its global commitments as well. So, India is not going to um, have a unidimensional policy in dealing with China or dealing with the United States or anyone else. Again, in a multipolar world, it is balance, it is engagement, and it is a conscious effort to use our advantages in the best way we can while realizing that there are limits to what others can do or what we can do. So we have to communicate, engage, and do the best for ourselves. But the foundation of foreign policy is domestic achievement, domestic growth. And I think this is something, this is an area in which the Modi government has performed well. You know, we tend to forget that in the last 9 years, 9.5 years of the Modi government, we've not had any major corruption scandal or major uh, outrageous event where um, our economy has been threatened. On the contrary, we have consolidated. Yes, some would say we could have done a little more in this or that area. For example, foreign trade is something that is vital because your trade clout, your attractiveness to foreign investments are crucial. And I think we've done reasonably well on that front. So I would say there is no one particular set of relationship which dominates our policy today.
Okay.
We have to work with
At
all.
the Mhm. At the recent Raisina dialogue, Mr. Jaishankar suggested that it is not Russia that the West needs to focus on. It is actually China which is causing major destabilization to the
Yes,
rules-based world order. Do you agree with that assessment?
I think there is a great deal of truth in that. That in a sense, China almost seems to get a free pass in terms of its own actions. Its actions are not scrutinized as closely as they might be. Um, for example, The Economist has an article in its latest issue about how China carries out surveillance over its own citizens. There are estimated to be about 10.5 million Chinese nationals who live abroad, who are now part of its modern diaspora. We're not talking about the historical diaspora. And China maintains what amount to kind of police stations in 100 locations, keeping an eye on them. Now, is this what a European country or any other country wants to tolerate? Uh, I mean, we see the huge amount of furor caused over the allegations that originated in Canada and then spread a little bit to the United States about alleged Indian actions. Here is China literally maintaining police stations in foreign countries. I mean, how do we give China a free pass on this? How do these countries give a free pass? So, I'm not saying that we have to become, shall we say, the town crier uh, talking about the threat of China, but we should urge countries to have a balanced view. And it's in their own interest. And that's all part of the process of international dialogue and communication in which we have to engage in the best way we can.
Mhm. Now, India has steadfastly supported Russia, in its economic and political relationship, despite Russia's increasing tensions with the West. Now, how long you think India will be able to manage to walk on this tightrope, in managing Russia and the West at the same time?
We walked on that tightrope ever since our independence. I mean, that's what foreign policy is all about. That engage, you engage with different entities, different powers. You don't neglect anyone. You don't neglect your own backyard. I mean, the neighborhood. I mean, also the global south, the country, the large number of countries with whom we have shared interests. So it's really foreign policy management, diplomacy in the word, is all about um, handling your relationships in a way that is pragmatic, motivated by self interest, enlightened self interest, working also as a friend to other countries. Vishwamitra is a nice phrase, uh, but without becoming over zealous or over assertive in terms of our own interests. So we must recognize that other countries have their own interests and we have to work with them, balance our interests, balance our uh, requirements against their requirements. And that's all about engagement. At the WTO, for example, talks are taking place right now on economic issues in the Emirates. Um, we we face some challenges there, but we find jointly with other countries some reasonable solution. That's what diplomacy is all about. And I think
Hmm.
in the last 9 years, uh, as indeed, and this applies also to the previous government in a large measure, we have been balanced in the way we have conducted our foreign relationships.
Okay. I now refer to your book, Churchill and India, which is a fascinating subject. Now, do you believe that the world leaders in the aftermath of the Second World War uh, took the newly formed India for granted, or do you think Mr. Nehru failed to secure the interest of the country, for example, by giving up the Security Council seat?
Look, the national independence movement of India, led by Gandhiji and Jawaharlal Nehru, Sardar Patel, Maulana Azad, and all the others, they engaged with the British. They engaged with the colonial power as best as they could, right up to and including the visit of the Cripps mission and the failure of the Cripps mission. The and then they were jailed. Yes, the Azad Hind movement was it well timed? That can be debated. But in effect, for a period of almost 3 years, the leaders of the Indian national movement were removed from the stage. They were held in confinement, solitary in the sense that they could not even engage with each other, communicate with each other. So the onus for that lies really with the British authorities and with Winston Churchill personally. This is something that has not been investigated sufficiently. It has not been examined through documents because I don't think our historians, we've been so fascinated by the drama in Delhi that we kind of forgot to look at the larger picture. And Churchill had no interest. I mean, Churchill, he played his cards very cleverly with the Cripps mission, going through the motions while, in effect, sabotaging the Cripps mission. And then he lost interest. So I call these 2.5, 3 years as the wasted years. Uh, can we blame Nehru for that? Nehru was in prison. What could he do? Could he have sent a message to the British saying that I capitulate and that I will engage in dialogue with you? The Congress leaders, why don't we ask the simple question: how did the British government, from London in particular, but also that completely wooden headed Viceroy Linlithgow, how could they waste that time, not engage in any kind of communication with the Congress leadership, and simply nurture Jinnah as their pet? Uh, because they were in essentially, we know, and I have shown this in my book through hard proof, a letter from uh, Roosevelt to Churchill in May of 1942. We know that Churchill had decided on partition. Why did he not engage with all the Indian leaders, including Jinnah, of course, on how that partition might be executed? I mean, the partition was a huge tragedy for the entire subcontinent, for the region that is today Pakistan and the region that is Bangladesh, and of course India. Now, nobody talks about this. Nobody talks about those wasted years. I mean, I'm a little surprised why our historians have been so negligent on this. I'm equally
Mhm.
astonished at how little attention we have paid to the Bengal famine and the origin of the Bengal famine, particularly in terms of the policy of the British government, which was to build up food stocks in London at the cost of everybody else. And all of Churchill's um, private scathing comments, his hatred of Hindu India and of the leaders of the Indian national movement. These are the issues also that need to be tackled. Uh, why is it that our historians haven't talked about this? I'm really baffled. I'm not a historian. So, yes, you can blame me that my book is not by a professional historian. Well, does it mean that if you are not an economist, you can't write about the state of your country's economic affairs or its economic policies? I mean, these are all issues that should be on the table, that should be discussed in depth, relying on
Yep.
documents, relying on
Yep.
archives.
I-
And we don't
Yep.
do enough of archival
I, I
research.
I agree. I agree. I mean, this is a topic that needs separate and a full length discussion by itself, because it's really
Yes,
fascinating, and hopefully, I would like to have a podcast with you on this topic.
it would be great to
Now,
have a conversation on this and bring in some other
we
people.
will
I'm not saying that I
we
have
will
the
do that.
monopoly of wisdom. There is,
Yeah.
wisdom and solid material in what many people say. Let's have a good
Sure.
discussion on that.
Yep, yep. We certainly will. Now let's move on to China, the elephant in the room. Now, undoubtedly, China has been the biggest challenge for the Modi government in terms of managing international relations. In your assessment, what has gone right and what has gone wrong in our dealings with China?
Look, um, we've done our utmost to engage China. China is the country that has carried out its uh, policy of pressure and intimidation, we can even say. Uh, First in the India, Bhutan, China tri-junction, and then in Ladakh. And we've engaged with China. Um, the foreign minister has had meetings with his counterparts. Uh, at various levels, we've carried out dialogue. Remember, everything that goes on behind the scenes is not always in the public domain. So I'm pretty sure that there are conversations that have taken place which neither side wants to talk about. Fine, that's how international affairs is conducted. It can't be conducted in the glare of publicity all the time. While of course the basic elements are reported to publics, at least in a democracy. So we've done that. I don't think we can sit on the sidelines and throw stones and say, oh, you should have done that, you could have done that, because we don't have the full picture. What we know is that we have taken a position of reasonableness, of multipolarity, if I may call it that we will engage with China. We are not out there to isolate China or to um, put China in a corner. We can't do that. No country has the power to engage in that kind of threats against anyone. So what we need is cool conversations, patience, and persistence. And I think we're doing this. So
Mhm.
I have nothing special on which I would fault the government in terms of its dealings with China. Uh, you have to engage. You have to continue your conversations in the best way you can. At
Mhm.
the same
Now,
time, pay attention to
mhm.
other powers and other possibilities. Learn from others as much as we can. And I believe that the way in which other Asian countries who also have complexities and issues with China, I have in mind Japan, South Korea, Vietnam, observe what they have done, and maybe there are some lessons for us to learn from this.
Mhm. Now, the border situation between China and India shows no sign of improvement anytime soon. So, if this takes a turn for the worse, who can India rely upon to help defend herself?
I think we'll have to rely on ourselves. I mean, in 1962, what happened? We received, in a very different situation, a very, very different kind of world of those days. It was 60 years ago, after all. Um, he received some measure of uh, material support from the United States and others. But in the end, we had to manage the situation by ourselves. That's how it is. I mean, countries today, the age of alignments is perhaps in a very new phase. You mentioned a little while back Trump and his relationship with NATO. That tells you the story of how countries are now rediscovering the value of standing on their own feet, individually
Hmm.
or collectively in their own region. So India is too large a country to sit in the pocket of any other country, and we are never going to do that. So let's see how things develop, but manage relationships in the most pragmatic, practical way that we can in a balanced manner. And I think we are doing that.
Okay. Uh, so let's now go to the another thorn in foreign relations policy, which is Pakistan. Now, do you think it's fair to describe Pakistan as a snake in the backyard dancing to the tune of China?
These are terms that are emotive, and they don't really help anyone with uh, dealing with real issues. Pakistan is a complicated country, like every other country, facing its own demons, its own problems, its own challenges. Uh, I think our attitude towards Pakistan, frankly, there should be also an element of sympathy on our part in how we look at China, look at Pakistan, in the midst of its own self inflicted problems. I mean, Pakistan has taken a huge debt burden, putting up projects that have really very, very little value for the country itself. This China Pakistan economic corridor. I mean, at the end of the day today, what is the point of building a pipeline or a communications link uh, that leads to a remote region of China, which is so far from the major consuming centers of China that it really makes no economic sense at all? I mean, this pipeline, what is this pipeline going to do? Has anyone any figures on how much oil or gas has actually transited through this pipeline? China has pipelines with Central Asia through which oil and gas come in abundant quantities. Why would they bother about taking oil or gas across the Arabian Sea, transferring it to this pipeline, and a pipeline where to a region where there is no requirement for any of these products because enough is coming anyway through other sources. The same applies to
Hmm.
the transport route. But these are Pakistan's problems, not ours. They have overinvested, they've engaged in projects that don't really bring value to them. They've taken huge debt burdens. So Pakistan is going to face with a lot of problems of its own. So let's sympathize with them a little bit and hope that Pakistan sees the value of engaging more logically, more openly with India in the economic sphere, in the sphere of people to people exchanges. And if they don't want to do it now, we'll have to wait patiently and hope that it will happen one of these days. Somewhere realization will come that treating India as the Dushman Desh it doesn't serve Pakistan's interests. We are not
Mhm.
Pakistan's enemies. We have nothing to gain from instability or problems in Pakistan. If only they could understand that.
Okay. You talked about the neighborhood first policy. But the challenge there is that China is going after the same countries like Pakistan, Maldives, Nepal, Sri Lanka. It's challenging us in our own neighborhood. Um, how would you manage that kind of
Why,
situation?
but why should we take this as challenging us? I mean, each country uses its external relationships in the best way it can to serve its own interests, be it a Bangladesh, be it a Sri Lanka. Of course, they will engage with other countries, as will Nepal. Quietly, without anyone taking too much notice, hydropower projects between India and Nepal are moving forward. This is something that had not happened for ever since independence, right up to about 6, 8 years ago. So, because Nepal has come to realize that at the end of the day, that those power projects can generate value for Nepal, give financial resources, earnings to Nepal, which will help in the development of their country, and their only market available is India. Take Bhutan. We don't talk very much about Bhutan, but something like 2,000 megawatts of power are now being generated between India and Bhutan through Bhutanese projects. And Bhutan is now prospering through this. Uh, Nepal has obviously come to realize that this is worth doing. Similarly, the cooperation between Bangladesh, Bhutan, and India and Nepal, BBIN as they call it, is also moving forward very well. Here is an example of transnational, sub regional groups which quietly work to the benefit of the people who live in the region. And this is a remarkable success story of the past 6, 8, 10 years, which gets very little attention. That's all right, as long as it changes the way in which our relationship with our smaller neighbors functions. Maldives, we have some problems there, but we can manage these problems. I mean, Maldives, we must also try and look at the world from the perspective of Maldives. They don't want to be dominated by one single power, so they will balance our relationship with them with other powers. This is normal. Sri Lanka, we don't question the fact that Sri Lanka engages with China, but it also depends on India. India is the nearest, closest large market. So the economic relationship is of great value. Let's work on this. Let's make this as mutually productive as we can. At the end of the day, it's economics which will play a major role in political relationships. That's the world of
Mhm.
today.
Yep. Now, continuing on that discussion about the close relationship between economics and foreign relations, India has managed to forge close relations with Israel and Middle East at the same time. Do you ascribe that to the hug diplomacy of or the Modi magic?
I think it's thanks to a policy that is older than that of the Modi government, but the Modi government has taken full advantage of that. See, for a long time, we took the position that we can't do anything with Israel because the Arab countries will object. But that's not the reality. The reality is that Arab countries have always understood that Israel is a reality. They engage with Israel in their own ways, in their own fashion. But there are all kinds of conversations that take place. So, when it comes to ourselves, let's find a practical way of working with everyone. And again, this is an area in which this particular government has invested effort in building good relations with a whole number of countries in West Asia. And this is excellent. This is really the very stuff of diplomacy. Emirates is a classic example, but so are Qatar, Oman, and all the others, and Saudi Arabia. Very, very important player. So we have to deal with them, engage with them, and not be have this obsession that, oh, what is China doing? Well, China will do what it can for itself. It's normal. Uh, let's treat this as a reality. But for our part, let's do the best we can for ourselves in a balanced way, in a manner that takes also into account the interest of the other partner. And I think we're doing this. We've done this for a long time. We are doing this now better and more comprehensively than in the past. And the net result is visible for all of us to see.
Mhm. You talked about India being a Vishwamitra as the opt description of how India is managing, and of course in the light of the climate change accord, vaccine diplomacy, champion of the global South. Do you think world is ready to accept India as a Mitra?
Well, I, these are slogans. Let's not get hung up on slogans or uh, get maybe too fascinated by our own description of ourselves. Does the world accept us as a friend? Yes. You know, quietly, we have run some excellent programs for tens of years now, for the last 50 years and more. The ITEC program, the Indian Technical and Economic Cooperation Program. Tens of thousands of people from other countries have come to India for training. Indian experts have gone to these countries, conducted training programs. Now, um, educational institutions are setting up campuses in Africa. That's the way to go. That's the way to work with other partners. Same thing is happening in West Asia. So, are we a good friend to other countries? Let's not go around boasting too much about it. Let's wait for others to tell us how they perceive India. But we have several basic strengths that we sometimes perhaps tend to overlook, at least in our internal dialogue. One of them is we have no inhibitions over transfer of technology. We are a country that has learned from others, benefited from technical and scientific and economic cooperation with a range of foreign partners, and we can now engage with others and offer them our experience. We have the experience of a country that has undergone economic development. And in many ways, I would say the Indian experience is more relevant than the experience of a country which runs a completely different kind of economic and political system like China. But that's China's problem. Let's not get too worked up on that. Let's do the best we can for ourselves. Let's not overlook Latin America. You know, I wish we paid more attention to all of the Caribbean and the Latin American countries. Caribbean, where we have historical, familial connections of the Indian diaspora, and the rest of Latin America, which also wants cooperation with India. Brazil is a major, major partner now. Brazil is heading G20 for the year. And again, great potential for mutual cooperation between two countries, cooperation which has really not developed anywhere near its real potential. And that applies to a range of countries: Mexico, Argentina, Peru, Colombia, the Central American countries. So the world is our oyster. The world is the place where we have to engage, but do it in a way that is balanced, that is focused on mutuality of interest. And I think we are doing this. We've been doing this for a long time, and we are doing this perhaps a little better today than we used to day before yesterday.
Okay. So, what do you think is the secret behind the so-called Modi magic in terms of foreign relations? We won't touch upon the domestic one. Do you think
These are
it's his vast experience, his commitment, or is he just a shrewd magician?
no, no. Look, these are words. At the end of the day, it involves building a solid platform in India of economic capability. That is a home task. And I think we are doing reasonably well in that area. taking that platform and using it to develop cooperation with other partners in a way that is to their benefit and to our benefit as well. And this is normal two-way cooperation. And I think we're engaged in this reasonably well. You want to call this magic? Fine. It's a nice term. But, on the eve of an election, a general election, all kinds of slogans will come up. That's fine. The proof lies in the support that the country provides to a government. And if after uh, nearly 10 years of rule, a particular government enjoys broad based support, then there must be something that they're doing right, and let them continue with it. That's fairly straightforward.
Okay. Now, just the final question, because we're running out of time. Do you have any two or three ideas that the Modi government should pursue in its third term, if it comes back to power?
I can't, off the top of my head, give you any profound insights. I would simply say continue with engagement. I think there is a potential for using Indian diplomacy to build solid bilateral relationships with a range of partners. I'm now not talking of the major powers. I'm looking beyond that. I'm looking at the second circle of countries. I mean, you can visually imagine your every country's external relationships into an inner circle, some 10, 12, 15 countries with whom your relations are crucial. We work very well on that. It is the middle circle of maybe 30, 40 countries with whom there is potential to do more, which maybe we should do. I think we can focus on that a little more. And the outer circle. And in the outer circle, I just mentioned a moment ago the relationships with Latin America and the Caribbean region and with Africa. We're doing very well with Africa. Maybe we can do a little more with South America and the Caribbean.